Hello Octoprint fans, former lurker here. Today I'm going to walk you through configuring a DSLR that does not download images to the Pi while the print progresses, but it waits until after your print's finished and it downloads all the images right before it renders. And what that does is it saves your camera, or actually you, the time that it takes to download the camera image to your Pi between every snapshot, so that your extruder has to park for a little bit less time. That's less time for it to ooze, and it means that there's fewer seconds added on to each layer. So it makes your print finish a little bit faster if you're using a DSLR. Before we start, let's go to the wiki page, and you can get there by searching for Octolapse, and Github should be the first link that pops up. Make sure you click on the wiki link right here. I've also dropped that in the comments, so you'll see that link there. And make sure that you first follow the Getting Started guide. So I'm assuming you're using Octolapse version 0.4 or newer. Well, maybe not version 0.5. There may be a new guide for that. We'll see, depending on what changes. And then also make sure that you follow this Configuring a DSLR guide. That tells you how to install Gphoto 2, and it runs some tests. It's really important that you get comfortable using a DSLR before you start with some more advanced methods. And then you want to follow the Configure a DSLR with no image download. I've got a guide here for that. That is a little bit more advanced. It takes a little bit more setup. It requires your camera to be compatible with a few more functions. And I've got videos for both of those. Hopefully I've added links below, so check those out. Once you're done with all that, find this Configure a DSLR with deferred image download. That's what we'll be following today, and go ahead and click on that. Now, we've already talked about some of this stuff, so we know what deferred image download does. We know that you should have followed this. So really the step one here for us is actually just to create a camera initialization script. Now, what this script is going to do, it's going to do two things. It's going to tell your camera to save to the SD card instead of just saving to RAM, and it's going to also delete all of the images on your camera. Now, definitely if you've got an SD card in your camera and it's got family photos or anything that you care about, pull it out right now, back them all up, because we're going to delete everything on your camera. So fair warning, and I'm probably going to mention it again later, but again, everything's going to be deleted on your camera. Back it up now. Okay, so let's open a terminal window, because that's pretty important. And again, if you followed the DSLR guide, I show you how to set that up. So I'm just going to open it here. I have to log in. I'm going to log in as the Pi user. I'm copying my password. I'm going to paste it in with a single right click. Oh, whoops. Let's try that again. Copy. Click, right click, paste. Sometimes it doesn't work. I haven't figured it out yet. I'm sure it's user error. Okay. Now, let's go back to the wiki, and there's a little caveat here. So this line right here tells your camera to set its capture target to option number 1. Well, option number 1 on your camera might be different than option number 1 on my camera. Now, fortunately, there's a good way to tell this. So let's find this little note about capture target settings, and let's run this command that asks the printer what options it supports for capture target. So I'm going to copy that out, go into my terminal, paste it in, hit enter, and it gives me two choices. You can see these choices here. One is internal, or excuse me, 0 is internal RAM. That's not what we want. That's the default. That's going to save it to its RAM, and the RAM is going to just vanish the next time you take a picture. What we want is a memory card. Now, yours may not say memory card. You may have multiple memory cards in your camera. So I'm not sure what the right setting is going to be. You know, it may be in a different language if you're using like, you know, French or German or something. But find the memory card. Experiment a little bit. If at first you don't succeed, you know, try another option. But for my camera, it's 1. So let's remember, for this camera, whatever your option is, mine's number 1. So we're going to go back to the wiki, and we're going to open up a new file, and we're going to call it initialize camera erase all images. And first we're going to change the current directory. So I'm going to go to the scripts folder, home pi scripts, pretty appropriate, right? And then we're going to open Nano. That's the default text editor, or it's a text editor that's available if you're using Octopi. I'm going to copy that line. I'm going to switch back to the terminal, paste it in, and now we have an empty text file open with Nano. So let's go back to the wiki, and you'll see the files here, and let's paste it in. So make sure you copy everything, including this very first pound symbol, all the way down to the end, the very last character. Make sure everything's selected. Copy. Switch back to your terminal, paste it in there. Now here's the point. If your capture target that we looked at earlier is not equal to 1, if that's not your SD card, move up there, erase that, and put in whatever the value is for your camera. For mine it's 1. So I'm going to leave it like that. Once you're done editing it, Control O to save. We already entered the file name, so we just have to enter to accept it, and then Control X to exit. Now we've created a script, but as of now, it's just a text file. It's not something we can run. So we're going to have to tell our operating system that this script is executable. So let's go back to our wiki, and you'll find the chmod command. So it's alter the security settings for this file. We're going to add the executable permissions for this script, which is the one we just created. So let's copy that. Let's go back to the terminal, right click to paste it in, hit enter, and boom, now we have an executable script, which is great. All right, the next step here is to test this script. And again, I told you I would warn you again, this is going to erase all images on your camera. So make sure you've backed it up. So let's go to the wiki again, and let's run. We're going to copy this command to, in the current directory, which is the scripts directory, let's run this script, which is the one we just created. So copy, terminal, paste, enter. Now this may take a while, because not only is it going to tell your camera to start writing to SD, but it's going to erase everything on there. So if you got hundreds of images, it's going to take a while. As a matter of fact, this brings up an interesting point here about DSLRs and how to minimize your print and your capture time. Always use the fastest memory that your camera supports, that you can afford or that you have laying around. The faster the memory, the less time it's going to take to do everything, to erase images, to save images. So use some fast memory, and you'll be a little bit happier. Okay, so we ran that. We didn't get any errors. Now I recommend walking over to your camera. Oh, if I didn't mention before, your camera has to be plugged in. So if you got an error there, if your commands didn't work earlier, make sure your camera's plugged in to your Raspberry Pi. So walk over to it and look and make sure that all the images on the SD card have been deleted. They should all be gone. If they are, great. Come back here. Let's go back to the wiki. And now we're going to create our snapshot script. This is going to actually take a picture, and it's going to save it to the SD card. So this command is going to open Nano. It's going to create a file called trigger snapshot. If you followed the no download guide, like I suggested that you do earlier, you can actually skip this step because we already created this file. But if you haven't, well, we can create it now. So let's copy that, go back to our terminal, paste in that. We're opening our file in Nano. You know the drill by now, right? Empty file. Go back to the wiki. Make sure, I'm just repeating myself, and make sure you copy everything, the very first pound sign all the way to the last E there in trigger capture. Copy that out. Go back to your terminal. Right click to paste. Control O to save. Enter to confirm. And Control X to exit. So again, now we have to add permissions, because as of now we cannot execute that file. It's just a text file. So we'll copy it, and we're going to add executable permissions to the trigger snapshot script. So go back in the terminal, paste that in, enter, and now we have a script. So let's test it real quick. We're going to test it later too in Octolapse, but just for fun, let's go back to the wiki, And you'll see here that we're going to copy this command. It's run the trigger snapshot script from the current directory. So I'm going to copy that. Terminal. Paste it in. And you'll hear your camera make a snapshot sound. And if you've used the download guide before, you should notice that it's quite a bit faster. I heard my camera take the picture and it's done. So, you know, maybe less than 2 seconds there. It's pretty speedy. Okay, so let's go back to the wiki now that that works. Oh, I almost got ahead of myself there. If you notice your script exits before you hear your camera make the snapshot noise, you may want to read these instructions here. Some cameras will basically exit immediately when they run this trigger capture command, and that actually will make your snapshots blurry because your camera will be taking a picture after Octolapse starts to move away from the stabilization point. So unfortunately, if you have to use this little method here, which you can read about, it means that your images are going to take a little bit longer to capture than they should because you're going to wait for a fixed amount of time, but it should still be faster than the download method. So it still is probably worth it to take a look at that. Okay, so here is the next step, step 3, create the pre-render script. This is kind of like the meat of this method. What this does is it tells your camera at the very end, after your print is finished, but before rendering starts, that it should download all of the images to a specific folder, and those are going to be passed in by Octolapse. It's going to copy them all there, and it's going to rename them so that they look just like images that Octolapse would capture. And it is possible that your camera may return the images in a format that this script can't handle, but I've already made a couple enhancements, so I'm improving this script all the time. So check back here if you have problems. I plan on adding enhancements to this, so this script may change. But anyway, let's create this. I'm calling this script download from camera and rename. I'm going to copy that. Switch back to the terminal. Again, you know the drill. We've opened an empty nano window. Whoops. Let's go to the wiki. Again, make sure, and I'm pointing this out because, you know, I've recorded this video a few times. I've missed it. So despite me harping on it, I've actually missed that. So make sure you copy that. And then down here, make sure you copy all this stuff too. It's all important. So copy. Now we're going to go back to our terminal. We're going to paste that in with a right click. Control O, output to save. Hit enter to confirm. Control X to exit. So now we've created that, and again, just like the other scripts we've created, we need to make it executable. Copy. Go back to the terminal, paste that in. We're going to add the executable permission to the script we just created. Now it's executable. And we're actually not going to test this because it turns out it's kind of hard to test. It's supposed to do a lot of stuff, so we're going to use Octolapse. There's a built-in test button. It does some fancy stuff to kind of help you debug these scripts. So let's go back to the wiki, and it says, of course, the next step is to configure Octolapse. So let's open up Octoprint and make sure you go to the Octolapse tab. And you'll notice that I've got a couple profiles for my Nikon DSLR here, and that's because I went through the other two guides that I recommend that you go through. This is the regular beginner script. It downloads the images and then it processes them at the end. This is the no download camera that I've created, and you'll notice that I have these unchecked. So if you have a DSLR profile for the same camera, uncheck them all right now. You really don't want to run two profiles with the same camera. I've never tried it. Doesn't sound like a good idea to me. So as a general rule of thumb, one profile per camera, or disable the ones you're not using. Now click on the cameras link and you'll go to the Octolapse settings page and straight to the camera tab. And if I click add profile, it'll open up a new profile. I'm going to give it a descriptive name, D5200, whoops, 5200. There we go, that's better. We're going to call it exactly what it is, deferred download. Now this is a script camera, because we're going to be acquiring all these images with just a bash script. So change your camera type to external camera script. That'll give you some different options. And the main difference is here, the snapshot acquire script. Filling this in with the full path of the script that you want to use to tell your camera to take a picture. And we've created that script. So if you go to the wiki, you can scroll down a little bit because we followed some of these steps. Aha, right here. So we created this script earlier, and this is the full path to it. So that's what we're going to put in there for this snapshot acquire script setting. Again, if you've got any questions, there's help links next to all these settings. You can click them. You can learn a little bit more about what's going on. And then the script buttons, I've added little test script buttons to all these. I've tried to make them like actually test the scripts as well as possible, but you can enter anything you want for these scripts, so I can't really test every scenario. But this one is at least, you know, known and tested. So if I click this, it's going to run the script, and it's going to run it with this timeout, because you don't want test scripts running forever. So I kind of thought, well, while we're testing them, you know, we'll make them follow this timeout rule. This snapshot acquire script, actually while your print's running, it will obey this timeout. So if it takes more than 5 seconds to acquire an image, you'll see an error, and Octolapse will abort the script. Most of these, I think all of these down here, these have no timeout. So these scripts here, although for the test button, they're going to time out with this setting. When you're running a print, they're not going to time out. So they'll run, you know, for days if that's how long it takes. All right, so I'm going to add a couple zeros here. Let's make this 500 seconds, because every 1,000 here is a second. This is milliseconds. So it's really 500 seconds. All right, so I'm going to click this trigger snapshot.sh. I hear my camera take a snapshot, and it says that there's partial success. But if you read the message, it says that the script works, but no snapshot was found in the target folder. So it was not only testing to make sure there were no errors, but it was looking for the file that may have been downloaded with the script. But because we're doing deferred download, it's exactly what we want. We don't want it to download any images. So it's working just fine. So let's close that out. Now there's two more we got to fill in. The before print start script. So let's go back to our wiki. Scroll down a little bit. We followed all these. Aha, here we go. So this is the before print start script, and right here is what we're supposed to paste into it. And again, that's the initialize camera and erase all images. Again, this is going to erase all your images, but you probably already erased them, so maybe it's not a problem now. But just, again, more fair warning. So switch back to your camera profile, paste that in. We're going to hit test. This one can take a while, but it probably won't right now because there's only a couple snapshots on there. It's testing, it's done. So you should get green, and it should have worked. Now the next one we're going to fill in, and this is the most interesting script. This downloads all the images, renames them, moves them into the right folder, and prepares them. Oh, excuse me, it's before render. It prepares the images, moves them into the right place so that Octolapse can see them and render them. So let's go back to the wiki. We follow these steps. So here we go. The before render script. Make sure you paste it in the right place. So again, it's going to run in the scripts folder, the download from camera and rename script that we created. Whoops. Copy. Back to Octoprint, paste that in before render, make sure you get the right one. Paste, and then we click test. And it's going to time out after 500 seconds. It didn't take very long because I just erased all the images that were on there. This script can actually take a long time, 20, 30 minutes. If you have a huge SD card and you've got ultra high res images and there's thousands of them, it's going to take a while. So expect it to take some time when your print's over. Okay, everything passed all the testing. Let's save this profile. Let's close these settings. You'll notice the new profile popped up right here. Deferred download, make sure it's enabled. Make sure your other DSLR profiles, if you have any, are disabled. And then if you select here in the Timelapse preview, if you pick your new profile, this deferred download profile, you'll see a message that says that no snapshots have been taken, and a preview will appear as snapshots are taken by Octolapse. Actually, this is somewhat of a fib. You're never going to see a snapshot here because this camera doesn't download snapshots as they're taken. So you won't ever see a snapshot preview here, unfortunately. You'll have to look at the image on your camera, but that's the whole purpose of why we're adding this new profile, because it's not downloading. So that's a good thing for us. Okay, so now that everything's configured, we got our profiles ready. Let's turn test mode on because we want to test our settings. I recommend picking a simple file, something small, something very fast to print, something that doesn't have a lot of layers. And since we have test mode enabled, it's going to prevent our printer from getting hot. It's going to keep our hot end cool. It's going to keep our bed cool. It's going to keep our fans from turning on. And it's going to keep plastic from being extruded. So it's really designed to make it really fast and easy to test things over and over again, like this script, because you might run into problems. You probably have to adjust your camera settings. You're going to want to turn on autofocus. You're going to want to turn on auto white balance, auto exposure, make sure all that stuff looks good. And the best way to do that is to run a couple layers of a print and see how the final video looks. And also real quick, because it takes a long time to render high-res videos, I'm actually going to turn my webcam off too. I'm going to edit my rendering profile. I'm running a Raspberry Pi 3, so I have 4 cores. I'm going to bump my rendering thread count up to 3. So that leaves 1 free core, and it has 3 threads are going to be created across 3 cores to render. So it could be, you know, quite a bit faster. Let's go ahead and save that. Select my test cube, select it here. Yeah, test mode's on. You see this little message, so that's good. So let's hit print. And immediately when I hit print, your printer, oh, because I'm using a smart trigger, you may not be using one of those. If you follow the Getting Started guide, you've learned all about this. If not, definitely take a look there. This shows you what your time lapse is kind of going to look like. I'm going to accept it because I know it's good. I printed this file over and over. Accept, and now my printer starts homing. This will take a few seconds to home, so if you've watched the other guides, you've already seen this, but I need to fill the time a little bit, so I'm going to go to the Octolapse tab, and I'm going to go to the bottom here and point out this snapshot plan preview. This is like a cool new feature, and you can turn it on and off by expanding current run configuration and clicking this little toggle box right here, snapshot plan info. Turn it off, turn it back on. It uses a little less bandwidth when it's off. It'll show you how many G codes have to execute until the next snapshot's taken, what percentage the layer is complete, let you do a little preview, let you see, you know, how the time lapse is going to go. And up here you see that little icon and that green, it means it's taking a snapshot. I just heard my DSLR click. Now it's acquired 1 image. So it worked. Now that image wasn't downloaded, so we don't see it here. You know, it's on the camera, it's not on the Pi, but it got taken. So let's, I'm gonna wait for it to take another snapshot. You can see we're about 84% complete. And after it's done that, 2 snapshots is the minimum number that is required to render a time lapse. So now it's got 2. If I cancel, it's gonna go ahead and render. So it's running the script. Oh, it finished. It was real quick because it only downloaded 2 images. Now it's doing post-roll and it's rendering. And it's going pretty fast, but it's still going to take a little while to finish. But if you've gotten this far and you haven't gotten any errors and you see that it's rendering, you know that your camera is configured properly. So now it's really a matter of making your image quality good. I've already discussed, you know, making sure you've got autofocus disabled. So you've got manual focus, you've got manual white balance, you've got manual exposure. Make sure you've got really good lights, like much brighter than you think you need. Read up on photography light positioning. Close all your blinds, close the doors to your room. Cover up any lights that you're not using to illuminate your printer, LEDs on your printer, overhead lights. You know, put some tape on your light switch to make sure you don't walk in the room and flip the lights on in the middle, because you don't want a single frame that's, you know, much brighter than the rest. You don't want any flicker. You want kind of a perfect time lapse. And I would recommend, once your video is done rendering, open it up in here, download it. You're only going to see a couple frames if you stopped it early, but download it, see how it looks, make your image adjustments, then rerun another print in test mode and keep adjusting it. And when you think you've got the image looking good, let it finish your test print. You know, get 50, 60, 100 frames, see what your time lapse looks like, and once you're totally satisfied, now your camera's set up and ready to go. And then the next time you set up your DSLR, if you move it, the lighting conditions change, do the same procedure. Just to make sure your camera images look good, get familiar with your DSLR and how Octolapse works. That'll give you the best image quality. Now let me point out some links here real quick on the bottom of the tab. There's the About link that opens up the Octolapse About page. I've got all of my patrons listed here, everyone from Patreon who's supporting me. Thanks guys, it really helps. Also, I've got some developers who have helped and some other people who've contributed to Octolapse in one way or another, including Gina. Gina's the creator of Octoprint. Guys, give her a lot of love. She made all this possible. Thanks, Gina. I'm going to close that. There's a link to my GitHub page that's got a lot of repositories, maybe some different stuff like the Arc Welder plugin, which is cool. It's unreleased. Obviously, Octolapse, some other stuff that I've been doing. It's all on there. There's a link to my sponsor page if you want to become a sponsor on GitHub. Also a link to my YouTube channel. A link to a PayPal page. You can send me some like coffee or beer money. I'd really appreciate that. But you know, Octolapse is open source, so it's free for everybody. And a link to my Patreon page. Once again, thanks for all the Patreons. And actually, if you look, the video's done. So there it is right there. Download that guy. See what she looks like. Whoops. It's kind of not full screen. And it doesn't really move at all because I only got one frame. So, but you can kind of get an idea of what it would look like if it were a full time lapse. But it's in focus. You know, it's not too bad. I'm not focused on where the print would be if I was actually printing. So I would probably do this a couple more times. Just my camera to get it to look good. All right, so that's it. So if that worked for you, you have now successfully configured probably the trickiest kind of DSLR capture that you can possibly do in Octolapse. So congratulations and happy Octolapsing.